These laws that you see that are being introduced, they are coming with the intention of silencing, not sort of moderating or not sort of putting things in a legal, in an acceptable format. They are coming in the form of silencing dissent. This will not work. I mean, these days where you stop one, you get 10 other options available. The world has become truly a global village in terms of information. As much as we would like to censor things, and the government is doing its uttermost to sort of control information as much as they can, but you can't. This is not the time of Ziaul Haq. So when it comes to self-censorship, my understanding is that when the state is not able to protect journalists, when they're not given that kind of protection that they need to do their work, they tend to then sort of self-censor things because there's always the danger, and we've seen this time and again where non-state actors, especially and state actors, go after them for stories that they've done. So just to give you an idea, when we're talking about the time when the MQM was very powerful in Karachi, a lot of journalists would self-censor because they would receive threats, and these threats sometimes were also carried out. So, and the state just stood by and did nothing. So, in the general interest, because we always say that a good journalist is not a dead journalist. The journalist has to be alive to report. So you have to take your own precautions. And you've seen that also when it comes to religious extremists as well. And this culture of impunity, whereby journalists are in Pakistan, a number of journalists have been killed and tortured and threatened and kidnapped, but almost none of them have seen their cases being taken forward by the state. So this culture of impunity, which is sort of unique to countries like Pakistan, where journalists can be killed or whatever, and there's no legal action, no follow-up, the perpetrators are not brought to justice. In such very sort of trying and dangerous circumstances, journalists resort to self-censorship to protect themselves and their colleagues. So this is where it started from. And this has not happened overnight. It's crept in. And you've seen times when it's been high and then it's become low. So it's very much there. Again, self-censorship, Major, what we have to understand with self-censorship is that if the state and non-state actors feel that they can threaten, bully, intimidate, kidnap, murder journalists and get away with it, then this will continue. So it is actually on the side of, actually the onus is on the government. And we have seen time and again, very recently as well, in Sindh, in other parts of the country, where journalists are either picked up or threatened or killed, and nothing happens. So this has to change. And with this change, if these people are brought to justice, it is going to help in terms of empowering the media. The other issue, of course, is that when it comes to the media, we also have to sort of see that the conditions that they work in. Self-censorship also comes not just from state and non-state actors. We forget self-censorship also comes from the owners of these publications or these media houses, because there's a commercial element as well. I mean, there are lots of things that you cannot write about. For example, you cannot write about Bahria Town and get away with it because most media houses will not let. So that's where the self-censorship comes, where you also have drawn lines, not just in terms of political and religious issues, but also commercial issues. So in that, of course, it is the owners and the sort of the those who run these channels who have to also understand that there's a bigger issue at stake here, which is that it's not just the safety of journalists, and it's also about the fact that if you don't report on these issues, these issues will be reported on regardless. It's not that just because you don't write about them or you choose to ignore them, they won't go away. I mean, they will be reported in the digital media, on the social media, and people. So the bigger issue now is the relevance of mainstream media. Because if you're going to censor things in the mainstream media, and you've seen that happening, not just in terms of self-censorship, but censorship at large, various government organizations, entities, commercial entities, political and religious organizations have consistently uh, put pressure on media houses through various means to stop stories, to change stories, to delay stories, to give different distorted versions. Now, in all this, what's happening is that mainstream media is becoming irrelevant. People are turning to social media for their news. I mean, if you look at uh, how television journalism, in terms of the TV channels, I mean, they may be very happy in terms of their ratings and that one is beating the other. But at the end of the day, the audiences are shifting. They're going away from television, mainstream television. So this is a bigger issue at stake as well. But the one thing you have to understand is that whether we like it or not, two things are happening. One is that the audience is shifting to digital. They're consuming news through digital platform. For example, they're using their cell phones to. Most of the people under 35 do not sit in front of a TV screen. Neither do they take up a newspaper. They consume their news through their cell phone, and we have to accept that. The other thing that we have to accept is that mainstream journalism, as much as it's valued and honored, audiences are now moving towards not just digital platforms, but also towards influencers, um, people on YouTube who have their channels, also to uh, people who like TikTokers for their news and for the information. Now, we can say it's very bad and it's really, but this is the reality that younger people are looking for their, and not just news. In fact, what is more interesting is that people under 35, news is just one portion of the content that they consume. Much of it is entertainment and information that is not necessarily news. And this they get from digital, let's say they get from Instagram, for example, they get it from YouTube, they get it from other platforms. So what we also need to understand is that not only are we seeing a situation where audiences are moving towards consuming news digitally, but also the fact that journalism or journalists, what they produce is just one of many other sources of news and information that is being available to people. What is the intention of this? You see, we have defamation laws from colonial times. They're not applied in the way that they should be. When PEMRA issues a notice to a channel, the intention is not misinformation. The intention is not disinformation. The intention is to punish someone for something that they've done. So if you move with this intention, and all these laws that you see that are being introduced, they're coming with the intention of silencing, not sort of moderating or not sort of putting things in a legal, in an acceptable format. They are coming in the form of silencing dissent. This will not work. I mean, these days where you stop one, you get 10 other options available. The world has become truly a global village in terms of information. As much as we would like to censor things, and the government is doing its uttermost to sort of control information as much as they can, but you can't. This is not the time of Ziaul Haq when people, even in those days when Ziaul Haq was president, people would tune into BBC and they would listen to it in the night and get their news. So and this is, I'm talking about BBC radio, not television. And they would sort of sit down on the radios and tune in. So you can't stop this. The danger in this, of course, is that if you censor so much, if you stop the truth coming out, then you will have a lot of disinformation floating, a lot of misinformation floating. People will start believing that, and this will go against the state eventually, because if you're not giving the authentic source, people are going to use other sources, and that can be, in many ways, it can be distorted. That is the danger now. Well, to begin with, print media is dying, and this is a reality. As much as we love print media, I've been an editor of a newspaper, and my first love was print media, but that's dying. We don't see, in many instances, what we are seeing is that broadcast is surviving, television is surviving, in terms of the fact that Pakistan has a very low literacy rate. Therefore, a lot of people turn to television for their news. And this, but we're talking of people who are over 40, 45, 50 years old. The younger generation, which is under 35, which now forms about more than 40% of our population, is moving towards, like I said, digital media, and it is looking at news and non-news sources for information. Now, what does this mean? It means a couple of things. One, advertising revenue is moving towards digital. So that's where the jobs will be in journalism. That's where the action will be. The second thing is that when we look at digital itself, digital platforms, right now what we're seeing is a lot of, I, apart from those digital platforms that are in some way associated with mainstream media, there are very few independent and outspoken digital platforms right now. That is where the future is. We're not seeing, for example, on digital media, we don't see independent news platforms doing investigative journalism. We have seen that in India. In India, you have 3 or 4 very strong digital platforms that are consistently criticizing, opposing, and checking the Modi government. It's true of 1 or 2 other countries in South Asia. Pakistan is still yet to get into that situation. We have some budding and some very promising platform, but we don't see that level of journalism yet. But I'm confident we'll get there because there is always an appetite for good investigative journalism and also good journalism itself. And we're not seeing that on mainstream media. So my hope and my sort of expectation is that this will now come in digital form and on the digital media. Newspaper, I've worked as a director news of a news channel. I've also looked at digital. What I'm seeing is that there are few people, young and old, who are in that state of mind where they can do it. There are a lot of people around, but the level of competence, level of professionalism, I don't see that as I used to see it maybe 10, 20 years ago. So there is a need for good journalists. There is a need for people who can speak truth to power, brave young men and women. There is a need for people who can report accurately without bias. Now the question is, are there enough jobs? Yes, there are. There are jobs, and I know that in digital, they're always looking for people. But 2 or 3 things, my advice to younger people. Number one is that don't expect, when I talk to younger people, and this is not just true of Pakistan, I've also taught in Australia, and this is a global thing, that they want stardom, famedom. So everybody wants to be a news anchor. A news anchor is just one part of the job of journalism. There are lots of others where there's not such fame and glory, but at the same time, the work is very good and it's very rewarding. So don't look for show business, try to do journalism. That's one advice. The other is don't expect too much money. I mean, if you want to make money, go into banking, go into maybe some other profession. In journalism, there is money. It's not that we're just dirt work, but it comes gradually and it eventually does come to you, but don't expect to become rich very quickly. You will not. The reason why most of us are in journalism is because of the sort of satisfaction that we get when we get our stories published in some form and we see our name in print. That gives us more satisfaction than the paycheck. The third thing is that you have to multitask. Gone are the days when you could focus on one medium. You could say, I'm going to be a print journalist, I'm going to be a radio journalist. You have to be all. You have to be a multimedia journalist. And to do that, you have to have the relevant skills, which means that you have to be versatile. You should know you should be able to understand the technology that allows you to deliver. So you should be able to use your cell phone to make videos. You should use your cell phone to do audio. You should be able to put it together in a package using your cell phone. You should be able to run around and do stories quickly, write different intros. You should have that language. Language is a very big, very important thing. You should be sound, not just in English, but in Urdu if you're doing Urdu. So these are all things you have to consider. But at the end of the day, I can say it's a very noble profession. It's one of those professions that gives you satisfaction in terms of the work that you do. And when you look back at some of the stories that you've done, you are happy with yourself. So this is my advice.